Hi, everyone, and welcome to COS Live. I'm Rita Peters, and I will be your host for this special edition of COS Live. The Wyoming House Education Committee is scheduled to hear public testimony and then vote on our Article 5 resolution calling for a convention of states in just a few moments. You will hear it referred to in Wyoming as SJ1. Our sponsor in Wyoming is Senator Eric Barlow. 19 states have already passed our resolution calling for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution on 3 topics: imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and setting term limits for federal officials and for members of Congress. Now, we need 34 states to get to the nation's first ever Article 5 convention. So that means we have just 15 to go to get there. So how did we get to this point? Well, the Convention of States Wyoming team has been busy building support across the state and in the legislature. Over 13,000 Wyoming residents have signed the Convention of States petition, asking their legislators to vote yes on COS. Last month, we had victories on the Senate side of the Wyoming legislature, with victories in committee, as well as an overwhelming victory on the Senate floor. That vote was 22-7 in favor of the Convention of States Article 5 application. If we have a successful vote in this committee today, our Article 5 resolution would then be sent to the full Wyoming House for debate and final passage. So a successful vote today would be a critical step forward in the legislative process. With just one more step to go, Wyoming is on track to become state number 20, and I'd love to see them do it. Now, stay tuned after the vote today because we will have a recap. I'll offer a bit of commentary, and we'll get live reaction from Convention of States Action Regional Director Deanna Beckett. Wyoming is one of the states in her region, which we refer to affectionately as the Wild West region, and it has been wild this year. We have had 2 chamber victories already this year, both in the Wild West region. Both the South Dakota Senate and the Wyoming Senate have passed our Article 5 application. At the committee level, we scored a preliminary victory in an Iowa Senate subcommittee with a 2-1 win. Actually, we got a 2-1 win. There, I got it. In subcommittees in Iowa in both the House and the Senate. And a little bit later this week, we're looking for the full House committee vote in Iowa. So stay tuned for that in a couple of days. So that'll just happen actually on Wednesday. And you know, folks, Wednesday is going to be a huge day for Convention of States. I haven't done the research on this, but possibly an unprecedented day. And here's why I say that. This is what's going on Wednesday that has to do with Convention of States. At 9:00 a.m., now all these times are in Eastern time zone because that's where I'm at. 9:00 a.m. on Wednesday, we expect Ohio to have a sponsor the first hearing of the year on our Article 5 application. That's the one in Ohio where the sponsor just introduces the legislation, tells the committee about it. At 10 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday is when we expect that Iowa House State Government Committee, the full committee, to consider, debate, and then vote on our application there. If we get a successful vote in that committee, that moves our application on to the full House floor in Iowa for a vote there. At 1 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday in the state of Maryland, they will have a hearing on our 34 Ready legislation. That's the procedural piece that sets forth how the state will choose and then oversee their commissioners to any Article 5 convention that gets called. So that hearing also happening on Wednesday. At 2:30 on Wednesday afternoon, Nebraska will have its committee hearing featuring Mark Meckler for testimony on an Article 5 resolution that would effectively remove the sunset clause that's there on our existing Nebraska application. That committee will also hear 34 Ready legislation. So big day in Nebraska. And again, Nebraska is one of those 19 states that have already passed our application, but we're working on removing a sunset provision there that would have it expire in a couple more years. And then finally, last but not least for Wednesday might be the day when the Kansas Senate debates our Article 5 application. We're already through the Senate committee there, and it's ready for a debate and discussion on the Kansas Senate floor. So possible debate there on what's known as second reading in the Kansas Senate on Wednesday. And then that would be potentially followed by an actual final vote in the Kansas Senate on Thursday. Also coming up on Thursday in the afternoon, about 4:30, we expect a House committee hearing in Rhode Island. So this is a huge week for Convention of States, and I love to see all of this action all over the country, considering our Convention of States application. If you're watching and waiting to view this hearing in Wyoming, I should let you know that Senator Rick Santorum is expected to testify in this committee hearing today. However, he is on the road headed into Des Moines, Iowa to meet with some legislators there. So here's hoping that things go well, the technology works out, and that Senator Rick Santorum is able to get on via Zoom to give some testimony for this Wyoming House Education Committee. So that's where we are. It looks like they're on the first bill in this committee meeting today. There are two bills on the agenda, Convention of States, which again will be referred to here as SJ1. We are second on the agenda. So producer G's keeping an eye and an ear on this hearing for us so that we'll know when it's time to shift over to the live stream, and we'll let you see the public testimony, hear the debate, and hopefully watch a favorable vote in this House Education Committee. We do expect some of our grassroots folks to be there giving testimony, and I can tell you that our state director in Wyoming, Julie Baker, has been working hard in that state. So proud of her efforts. She does a wonderful job. I'm hoping we will see and hear some testimony from Julie. Now, I see that some folks are wondering why our application is being heard in an education committee. Well, that's a great question because typically the Convention of States application goes to committees like committees on state government or committees on state affairs, sometimes a judiciary committee or a rules committee. But the fact is, it is actually appropriate for this Article 5 application to be heard in an education committee because that second topic that's in our application for a convention would let the convention propose amendments that limit federal jurisdiction and federal power. So if you think about that, it would be absolutely germane for an amendment proposed at a convention called pursuant to this application to make it very clear that the federal government has no jurisdiction over public education within the states. So it makes it very appropriate for us to be heard in an education committee. And there are a number of other types of committees where we could appropriately be heard as well. Today, Congress, the entire federal government, is involved in a lot of areas of policy making where they actually have no legitimate constitutional authority to be there. So, one of the things we're hoping to do is to put the federal government back in its constitutional box where it belongs, right? So that's why we're in the Education Committee. We are hoping for a favorable vote there today. It is definitely tougher in Wyoming on the House side than it was on the Senate side. Again, if you're just joining us, our application SJ1 has already passed on the Senate side of the Wyoming legislature, and now we're pending on the House side, getting ready for this House Committee on Education to take up our resolution. As a reminder, the amazing vote in the Wyoming Senate was 22-7. So a resounding victory there. Would love to see that kind of victory again on the House side, but I think it's going to be a little bit tighter. Now, I want to tell you about something else that happened a little earlier this month that we didn't actually live stream because it was so short. And that was a New Hampshire committee voted 10-7 to advance our resolution to the House floor. So we're still pending there. We could see action in the New Hampshire House in the coming weeks. Stay tuned and we'll keep you posted on any developments there. We ended last week. Was it last week, Producer G? I guess it was, on a win in Kansas. A committee there voted on a voice vote to advance our resolution to the floor for debate. That may have been 2 weeks ago. I'll be honest, there is so much happening these days that I lose track of the days and the weeks and what happened which week. So far this year, a total of 18 states are considering our Article 5 application. And I'll just list those for you: Connecticut, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Ohio, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Texas, Vermont, Washington, Wyoming. And Producer G, here's a late breaking one. I was just informed that Illinois has now introduced our Article 5 application this year. So another state where it's pending. And here's the list that you see in this beautiful graphic that shows you the 19 states that have already passed our resolution. Those are listed there in green. So every state that you see there in green has already passed our Article 5 application. We've got 19 states on the list so far, on the march to 34. That's how many it takes to call an Article 5 convention. That convention, of course, would be limited to the agenda that's stated in the applications of the states that have passed it. So in the case of Convention of States, again, it's just 3 topics: imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting federal power and jurisdiction, and setting term limits for federal officials and members of Congress. A lot of people get confused about this. Some people think that an Article 5 Convention of States opens up the Constitution and that people can just kind of do whatever they want to it at the convention. Nope, that is not so. All the convention can do is propose amendments that are germane to the agenda or the topics stated in the 34 applications that triggered the convention. Excuse me. So that's all the convention can do. It has the power to propose amendments, the same power that Congress has under Article 5. Congress can propose amendments anytime it wants. If 2/3 of each chamber agree on a particular amendment, Congress proposes it, which means that proposed amendment goes out to the states for ratification. It only becomes part of the Constitution if 38 states agree to ratify it. So 38 states, that's 3/4 of the states. So think about it. In order to defeat any kind of bad amendment proposal, all it takes is for legislatures in 13 states to not do anything. They don't even have to defeat it, they just have to not act on it. So, ratification is a really high bar and a really strong protection on this Article 5 process. But getting back to what I was saying a minute ago, some people, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, they talk about an Article 5 convention as if it's a convention where the whole Constitution gets opened up and could potentially be rewritten. And that's just not so. The convention can only propose amendments, and amendments, if ratified by 38 states, get added to the Constitution, just like the amendments that we already have. They get added to the Constitution. So that's kind of how the process works. It is a safe process. We do have answers to all of the questions that people ask about. People will say things like, we don't know how it would work, or we don't know who would control it, but we actually do know those things. There's actually a long history of interstate conventions in American history. The states have frequently met in convention at various times in American history, and the founders knew how those interstate conventions worked. The states define the agenda. The states choose and instruct their delegates who represent them, the state legislatures, at the convention. And that's actually another form of protection on the process. So when the delegates are chosen by the state legislatures and go to the convention, the delegates or commissioners don't just go and do whatever they want. They go as the representatives or agents of their state legislatures. They're there to represent their state legislatures. The state legislatures are known as the principals, or the people who are being represented at the Article 5 convention. So that's another form of protection on the process. And as we've mentioned a few minutes ago, a lot of states right now are considering what we refer to as 34 ready legislation. And that legislation would put into the state code, or at least be passed as a resolution, and would indicate for the future how the state's Article 5 commissioners would be chosen, and how many there would be, and how the oversight will operate. So some state legislatures appoint an advisory committee that would advise and instruct the commissioners through the whole process. This 34 ready legislation can also impose penalties, often criminal penalties, for any commissioner who would violate the instructions or the oath that they take before they go and represent their states at this convention. So there are a lot of protections on the process. I've just gone through a few of them. Producer G, not sure where we are in this hearing. Looks like maybe are still some questions being asked on the first bill. Yeah, we're not quite there yet. So still waiting to see. Yeah, Producer G has offered to play the latest version of our COS Now video as we wait for this hearing to start. So let's go ahead and roll that, Producer G.
Week's episode of COS Now, two major committee victories moved us closer to making history. Starting in Idaho, where passionate grassroots supporters showed up in full force to push our resolution forward. And in Iowa, COS took another step through the legislative process, setting the stage for a crucial vote this week. All that and more on COS Now.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Happy Monday, everybody. I'm your host, Rachel Martin, and on this show, we break down all the latest news in the Convention of States movement. Make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. With that, we had 2 committee victories last week. So first, let's visit the Gem State. The Idaho House Committee on Judiciary, Rules, and Administration considered the COS application for an Article 5 convention. Droves of COS grassroots supporters testified in favor of HCR 10, as introduced by State Representative Jordan Redmond. COS Senior Advisor Rick Santorum provided expert testimony. Then, the legislators discussed their thoughts on the resolution. Here's State's Representative John Schertz.
But the question that has been in my mind, and I know it's been sparked by so much of the conversation we had today, if you believe the Constitution is a divine document, which I agree, 100% agree with, then why is this in here if not to use? Why is this in here if not for a time such as this, right now, today? Why? And as much conversation as I've had about this, I can't come to a thought except for when the people's voices need to be heard, that is there to be heard.
After a series of motions, the committee agreed to send our resolution to the Idaho House floor with a do pass recommendation. Meanwhile, in Iowa, a subcommittee of the House State Government Committee heard from the public on our resolution. Here's State Director Karen Schuster.
Congress has had the power to propose amendments that would rein in the federal government. It hasn't, and it won't. This is a problem the framers foresaw, and the very reason they gave us a second method to propose amendments. 88% of Americans support term limits, 71% want more limitations on federal power, 68% are in favor of a resolution like HJR 6, which calls for a meeting of the states to propose amendments establishing term limits, spending limits, and jurisdiction limits on the federal government.
The subcommittee voted 2-1 to advance COS to the full committee, which is expected to vote sometime this week. On Thursday, COS Action Senior Advisor Rick Santorum spoke to the Texas Public Policy Foundation, encouraging attendees to help Texas renew its call for Convention of States and remain a leader in the movement.
Texas passed our resolution to call for a convention of states to do 3 things. They passed it 8 years ago. To do 3 things. Number 1, limit the jurisdiction of the federal government, put fiscal limitations on the federal government, and put term limits on potentially all federal office holders, including the deep state. You passed that, but you also passed it with a sunset clause, which sunsets now. So the state, if you're going to maintain your leadership that you are so proud of, we need to get to it.
With Elon Musk and Doge continuing to dominate headlines, COS President Mark Meckler took to the airwaves this week to discuss the benefits of efficient government spending.
We are in a particular moment in time when there is an appetite among the American people for, as you described, a deep reformation of government, of fixing the deep problems that have now driven themselves to the very foundations of our government. And this methodology given to us by the framers is the way to do that. It's to go back and to be able to say to the federal government, for example, no, we don't want people like Mitch McConnell or Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer serving for 40 years in the United States Congress until they're no longer even cognitively able to do so. So there's an appetite for this among the American people.
Check out that full interview on Convention of States YouTube and Rumble channels. And that brings us to the final 5 highlights. COS Action's open letter to Trump has now surpassed 50,000 signatures with a goal of reaching 1 million. In order to put that letter on President Trump's desk, sign your name at conventionofstates.com/Trump. COS volunteers are holding Surge Days across the country, including Oklahoma, Indiana, Utah, and Texas. Surge Days enable COS activists to engage with legislators at their state capitals. Oklahoma State Superintendent Ryan Walters, who supports Convention of States, even stopped to speak with the attendees. The Hawaii team updated readers on their annual series of capital events. You can read more at conventionofstates.com/blog. COS continues to grab headlines in local publications, including Iowa, Michigan, Kansas, Georgia, and Minnesota. Finally, check out these snapshots from recent COS events, including in Oklahoma, Kansas, Hawaii, Vermont, Tennessee, and Texas. Thanks for tuning into this week's recap. Be sure to check us out on other social media platforms. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you same time next week here on COS Now.
Our founders created a constitution that put the states at the top of the food chain. That is not the Constitution we live under today. The Constitution that was created by the founders, remember, the states came together and founded the country and founded the Constitution, and the states were the ones who were supposed to be the government that interacted with the people. The federal government was to be this far-off place that dealt with national security and borders and things like that. But that has fundamentally changed. When people say, oh, don't mess with the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution's been messed with. This Constitution that people walk around and show is not the same Constitution that our founders created. If you ask for a copy of the Constitution from the General Printing Office in Washington, D.C., you won't get this. You know what you'll get? 2,600 pages. Because that is, people say, oh, we ignore the Constitution. No, Congress doesn't ignore the Constitution. They actually abide by the Constitution as amended by hundreds, if not thousands, of Supreme Court decisions. The left doesn't amend the Constitution by going through a process that's bottom-up that requires every state to pass a resolution and 38 states to ratify an amendment. They do it by getting 5 justices on the Supreme Court. And they believe in a living, breathing Constitution that changes at any time they want. We don't believe that. We believe in a Constitution that is representative of the values of our country.
He is now voting on the first bill that was on its agenda, which means that they should be moving on next to SJ1, which is our Convention of States application. So we are, again, looking to, yep, here we go. We'll go to the committee now.
Presenting that bill. I bet it's Senator Barlow who's approaching from far. Good afternoon, Senator Barlow. Good to see you.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, well, please walk us through your bill. Talk the resolution. Talk to us about it, and we're ready to listen.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to present the Senate Joint Resolution 1 to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I brought 2 constitutions with me, the United States Constitution and the Wyoming Constitution, not because I'm a constitutional scholar, but I think they do have bearing to what we're going to talk about today. And I want to start by saying that if when we took our oath of office, I guess 6 weeks ago, we attested that we would pay attention to those things. I've been doing this work. I've been fortunate to do this work in the legislature for several years now. And as I've gone on, I do my best to try to understand what the context of those constitutions is and how that's being applied. This bill has been a personal work of interest to me for my entire tenure in the legislature. So 13 years ago when I came in the legislature, somebody came to me and said, hey, what do you think about an Article 5? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. What article? Which article? Which magazine are we talking about? So I literally had to start learning about Article 5. And that's what I bring this to you in that context is, on my own, I went to 4 different meetings, national meetings, over the next 3 to 4 years. 3.5 years, all over to listen to folks both for and concerned with an Article 5. And that's how I came to believe in the process. Members of the committee, while this particular convention state has 3 particular calls in it, I know there are other calls out there. And I appreciate them and respect them because they are trying to access the same process which is laid out in Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. There's only 2 bodies that have the ability to amend the Constitution, to initiate that process. One of them is Congress, 2/3 of both houses, and one of them is the states, the legislatures of the several states. Again, 2/3 to actually initiate the application, and then the process ensues with a convention for amending the Constitution. So, Madam Chairman, quickly, I'll just go to through the joint resolution, And there may be folks in the room that want to talk to this because none of them left, not very many left after the last bill, just saying.
Buttons on too.
So anyway, and some will be for and some will have concerns. So I respect that. The whereases, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, obviously that just lays out kind of the thinking. Why is this important? This is a standard type of resolution that's been considered in 19 other states and adopted in 19 other states. I believe we're at 11 states right now that are considering it during this one. As you would know, 34 states is the bar for 2/3, and so we're getting closer to there. So line 6, empower state legislatures, as I mentioned, straight out of the U.S. Constitution. And then you can go through the rest of the whereases. But I think why is this? What are the purposes of this particular convention? Go to the bottom of page 2, lines 21 through 22, onto the page 3. It's to impose fiscal restraints. The Wyoming Constitution, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, great to see you. The Wyoming Constitution has fiscal restraints within it. If you'll recall, and I can pull up it's 1% of the total assessed value of the state is the maximum the state could encumber as debt. 1%. Well, we don't have that same in the U.S. Constitution. I haven't done the math, but I know I'm pretty confident that our 34 trillion is outside 1% of our nation's assessed value. 1% again. So 1%. So fiscal constraints. I'm not saying that's what an amendment may come out as, but fiscal constraints. In Wyoming, we have that. Limitation of the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Next one. Basically, the federal state. How much influence should they have? I'm just coming here from a committee meeting where we have 3 bills that are pushing back on health issues, that a lot of them came through the federal government. There was a bill, 3 bills. Anyway, my mind's not there right now. I left that meeting. But those 3 bills, a lot of that was limitations of other governments placing their impositions on us. And then the final one, Mr. Chairman, and going to the Madam Chairman left, Mr. Chairman is in the chair, is the terms of office of federal officials and members of Congress. Certainly we can have the discussion about term limits. Let's be clear, it would take 34 applications and then a decision on what would be taken forth at a convention, and that would have to come out of a convention. So section 2 is the process of laying out when you call, who can do that. Congress has no authority in this process except to call for the convention when it receives the requisite 2/3. They don't get to set the rules. They don't get to do any of that. That's up to the several states and how they are laid out. As you may know, several years ago, one of my good colleagues who was in the House at that time with me and now serves in the Senate, we amended the Wyoming statutes to lay out how that process works in Wyoming, how you select the people who are going to go take part in this, and how you recall them if they step out of bounds. How you say, that is outside of the scope of our charge to you as a state. It's time for you to come home. We'll send someone who can, and there's penalties within that. So continuing to walk through, like I said, there's a lot of folks here to talk, but I want to be clear. This is about us, I believe, doing the most fundamental thing, allowed as legislators, giving our constituents in the several states the ability to amend the U.S. Constitution. The process is laid out, 2/3 to get the application, 3/4 is the bar to ratify an amendment that would come out of this Constitution. What does that mean? Let's think about it in the opposite. 13 states of the current 50 could say no thank you. 13 states could say we're not interested. So I know we're in a closely divided nation, some would say right now, between the colors of states, but I don't think we're not that far off balance. We're not 13 one way or the other. So I think there's quite a bit there. Now, a couple of safety measures in here. Let's go to the bottom of page 4 to the top of page 5. Some people will have concern about the Bill of Rights. What's the First Amendment, Second Amendment? Keep going down the list. The first 10. The way this reads is it'll be out of order to consider those, and that would be a means for, if this state were to adopt this, and I hope we do, for us to recall a member who considered anything that was in that first 10, right? Second Amendment, no, it's off the table. We're not messing with that. And the state of Wyoming would say, come on home, delegate. That's what they're going to be doing there. We're not going to participate. And then, of course, the second thing, besides calling the convention, calling the convention, the second thing that the Congress can do, the only two things, is decide how the ratification process takes place. That's on page 5, ratified by the legislatures or by special ratification Congress, and those are also laid out currently in statute. And then, as I mentioned before, lines 13 through 16 of page 5, this talks about the instructions that we would give to degalas, Wyoming would give to delegates, and then obviously the penalties should they not, including come on home, you're out of line. We're not in that. And that's, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's the resolution. Because of the time and because of the number of people that are interested, I'm going to keep it as brief as I can and be glad to stand for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Barlow for being here today. So this paragraph 5 in section 2, that's at the bottom of page 4, goes on to the next page. Is that unique to Wyoming's legislation that we're considering here? Is that part of the other conventions in the other states?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, this is the same. If you're asking about whether the language that was passed in the other 19 states and being considered elsewhere, if this is unique to ours or all of them, my understanding, this is the identical language that's been passed in the other 19 states, consistent with what we believe as a republic. We are a republic, and that means every state gets one vote. So I think this is consistent with what's been already done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Senator. Page 2, at the bottom, 21 and 22, it says to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. This is a big question I have, because I'm wondering what amendment we can write that would actually do that, considering Amendment 10 already exists. My concern is that if court edicts can circumvent Amendment 10, which was clear as day to limit the federal government, what rule can we pass that courts would not circumvent? Just maybe to illustrate it, sometimes people think it's good policy to put up a sign that says no firearms, and then people bring them in anyway and they say, well, let's get a bigger sign. I'm afraid that we might just be asking for a larger sign, no government overreach. What do we have to actually ensure the government would, what's the enforcement mechanism they would abide by this new set of rules if they're not abiding by the current set of rules?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. So I guess I don't have a crystal ball to what the limitations, who we wanted to place limitations on. Let's say it's the power of taxation, which has already been dealt with in the Constitution. What if we wanted to go into one of those particular amendments and say, accept this or that? Then I think that may be a clear path. Now, if you're talking about the overreach of a particular agency, let's say that oversees public lands, then that might become more nuanced, because we don't have a clear path in the current Constitution to say we like that, except it shouldn't account to this. So I can't prognosticate how a group of people with similar interests would come together and say, how do we implement this? Folks in the room, I'm sure, have ideas about that. But I guess what I believe is most important is this: is we open the avenue, the access to this process, and then we decide how to actually, if we're willing and able and ready to implement it. So, like I said, I don't have something that says, by golly, this is what I'd do if I were there. I think we have to actually first of all, open that avenue up and then go have those very constructive conversations, just like you 62 do on the floor. Well, what about this? The ideas start flowing, the juices start flowing, and you're coming from different places, all 50 states, recall. different issues, different, challenges, et cetera. And I think that there would be an opening up. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just go a little further, that's what I found when I went to those 4 different meetings in Indianapolis, in Washington, D.C., in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, which was quite remarkable, actually. And then in Utah, which was still, they were all remarkable, but Independence Hall was quite remarkable, there were people from 30 to 40 states, and they just had all kinds of ideas. But what we were focused on is what's the mechanism to actually having those ideas heard and having a meaningful way to get them at least considered. And this was where we came, and this is what we were working toward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry I can't be more specific about something, but I think everything should be on the table, I guess is my point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. There are state agencies that would like to comment on the bill? Seeing none, we will open public comment. I could probably do 20 minutes in opposition and 20 minutes in support. So we will start with opposition. If you're in opposition to the bill, please come forward and fill the chairs. Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not currently a representative, though I appreciate the respect. My name is Jeanette Ward, and I am representing myself. Please vote no on Convention of the States. This is a bad idea because it threatens the very foundation of our republic. Supporters of the resolution are under the misconception that a convention would be limited to specific issues. They are wrong. James Madison, the father of our Constitution, refused to call for a second convention to incorporate the Bill of Rights. He said, absolutely not. It would be too risky to reconvene. He correctly perceived that another convention would open a can of worms. He insisted the Bill of Rights be added to the Constitution in appendix format. In 1988, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Warren Burger agreed with James Madison when he said, there is no way to effectively limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention. The convention could make its own rules and set its own agenda. Congress might try to limit the convention to one amendment or one issue, but there is no way to assure the convention would obey. A constitutional convention would shake the very foundation of our republic. While conservative states would likely use a convention to try to reduce federal authority, liberal states would almost certainly use it to go after the Second Amendment and the Electoral College. It is possible, even likely, that the ensuing disagreements could result in major civil unrest. A convention of the states should be avoided at all costs. If Wyoming legislators would like to change the Constitution, they should do so one amendment at a time. I implore you to vote no.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is David Iverson. I'm from Sheridan. I studied history and philosophy at Regis University and finally finished my degree at a Wyoming community college. The Convention of States, or an Article 5 convention, is a profoundly dangerous idea. And today I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. First of all, there's no rules to it. Second, you risk a runaway convention. And finally, that I've heard all of you argue against, we don't legislate on things that we don't know. The first question I have for you is, why is there a spittoon on the floor of the Wyoming House right now? Now, while you think about that, and I'll get back to it in just a minute, I'd like to talk about rules. Senator Barlow gave you lots of examples of how this thing is going to work. But I challenge you, representatives, show me where any of those rules are written down in any of our founding documents. You won't find it because it's not in the Federalist Papers, it's not in the Declaration of Independence, and there's only one spot in the Constitution, and it only lists 2 things that a convention of states can't do. And that is that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the 1st and 4th clauses of the 9th section of the 1st article, and that's all about slavery, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Those are the only 2 things that an Article 5 convention can't do. Other than that, there's nothing written down about an Article 5 convention. This book's got all of our state documents in it, the Federalist Papers anywhere, everything. And I implore you, if you think it's in there, go ahead and read it, because it's not. So let's get back to the spittoon real quick. The reason why there is a spittoon there is a rule that exists that says you can demand a spittoon. Now, there's a historical reason for it being there, but the main point is that it is there at all. The very first thing that you guys do, in fact, you can't conduct any business unless you adopt the rules. You can make any rule you want. There's another strange rule that says you can wear a bolo tie, or you can wear a necktie, or you have to wear a jacket. You could even pass a rule that everybody had to wear pink shoes. Kind of funny, but my point is that you could pass any rule that you want, and then the body would have to abide by it. Now, presumably, and we don't know this because there's no rules about an Article 5 convention, but the very first thing that would happen is you would have to pass the rules. Well, the very first convention did that too, and that's the only one that we've ever had. The very first thing they did is they changed the threshold of voting from it being unanimous to 3/4. So they could change how things are voted on. Senator Barlow says, well, it'll be one state, one vote. You don't know that because you can make the rules up as you go. Secondly, the first constitutional convention absolutely exceeded their authority. In the call for the convention, they had absolutely no authority whatsoever to write the Constitution. The only authority they had was to revise the Articles of Confederation, and even supporters of Convention of States absolutely agree with that. This book, which if you were here 2 years ago, you were handed a copy of it, is written by Michael Capek. He's a state director for the Convention of States. In this book, he too admits that the first convention was a runaway convention and that they absolutely exceeded their authority. Last thing, and I've already kind of covered the runaway convention. Senator Barlow mentioned that there are 3 calls in this resolution. First of all, I would submit that those calls don't matter because an Article 5 convention can do whatever they want. But he said there's 3 of them. Fiscal restraints on the federal government. What the heck does that mean? It is not specific, and I have heard each and every one of you on the floor of the House say that we can't vote for this piece of legislation or that one because it's not specific enough or we don't know what it's doing. So why would you even accept that in this resolution? The second one, limit the power and jurisdiction of the government. We don't know what that means either. The last one, term limits. Okay, that one's pretty specific, but we could make a very credible argument that we already have term limits. Final point I will make, my members of the committee, we do not have a problem with the Constitution. We have a problem with politicians. And if you vote for an Article 5 convention, you will still have a problem with politicians. And quite frankly, you'll be putting the people that created the problem in charge of the supposed solution. This is a dangerous idea, and I ask you to vote no. And I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Committee. My name is Marguerite Herman, and I'm here for the League of Women Voters of Wyoming. And we oppose this bill. We oppose the Convention of States over the process. It's not that we are critical of the outcome that is desired by the author of this, but the sponsor. We don't have any argument with the intention of it, but we support changing the Constitution through the congressional route that we have used successfully over these centuries. And I'll just briefly tell you why. I'll try to be as brief as I can. As said before, there are no rules and guidelines in the U.S. Constitution on how a convention would work, which creates an opportunity that could rewrite any constitutional right or protection currently available to American citizens. An Article 5 convention is a threat to the U.S. Constitution, rights and liberties. There is no language in the Constitution to limit a convention to one issue. And there is reason to fear a convention, once called, will be able to consider any amendments to the Constitution that the delegates want to consider. There are no guidelines or rules to govern convention. Due to lack of provisions in the Constitution and lack of historical precedent, it is unknown how delegates to a convention would be picked, what rules would be in place, what would happen in the case of legal disputes, what issues would be raised, how the American people would be represented, and how to limit the influence of special interests in the convention. And because there's no way to limit a convention's focus, any constitutional issue could be brought up. And just a short list of things that the league is kind of fearful would be compromised. Civil rights, civil liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, privacy rights, guarantee of equal protection, right to vote, immigration issues and the right to counsel and a jury trial, among others. Basic separation of executive, legislative, and judicial powers would be subject to revision as well. And just real briefly, there's a short list of things that the league would, if there were a convention, these would be the things that we would insist on to respond to some of our concerns I just mentioned. The league supports these safeguards for a constitutional convention. The convention must be transparent and not conducted in secret. Representation at the convention must be based on population rather than one state, one vote, and delegates should be elected rather than appointed. Voting at the convention must be by delegate, not by state. The convention must be limited to a specific topic. Only state resolutions on a single topic count when determining if a convention should be called, and the validity of state calls for an Article 5 constitutional convention should be determined by the most recent action of the state. And that just refers to some states have passed this and then rescinded it. And now that's not apply to us, but this is what we would be asking for the whole process. And so in short, those conditions are absent in this proposal, and without any kind of guarantees they would be present in any kind of prospective Article 5 convention. So therefore we oppose this bill, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? None. Thank you. Any other public testimony in opposition in the room? All right, we will go online then.
Mr. Chairman, you currently have 2 people online with their hands up, Tim Velder and Marty Halverson, and more coming on as we speak. So would you just like to stop at the top, start at the top, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's speak to Marty Halverson in opposition.
All righty. They're joining the room now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What a great subject for the Education Committee. I oppose Senate Joint Resolution 1, and I urge your no vote. The Constitution is not the problem, and a convention is not the solution. Other people have spoken about the technicalities of a convention. I would like to address the 3 calls. Impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. This is an admirable goal, but it is beyond naive to think that an amendment to the Constitution is going to restrain any administration with a currency printing press at its disposal. The Office of Management and Budget, House and Senate Budget Committees, House and Senate Ways and Means Committees, and other actors involved in this country's fiscal and budget policies are capable of such smoke and mirrors that any, quote, restraint imposed by the Constitution will become just another minor hurdle to work around. A recent example is President Obama claiming that Obamacare was paid for while hiding $750 million stolen from Medicare to pay for it. Crafty government officials and congressional staffers can spin a budget to fit any restraint a convention fantasizes it can impose. Witness former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen when they hit the debt limit under her tenure. We are taking extraordinary accounting steps to keep the government open. Extraordinary accounting steps, proof of smoke and mirrors. And do not doubt this. Any new attempt to fiscally restrain Washington, D.C. will be the excuse any administration needs to impose massive tax increases. Limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. The power of the federal government is already limited by Article 1, Section 8 of the original Constitution, plus the 9th and 10th Amendments. I can't imagine what amendment could be brought that is more explicit or include more limitations than those. As the federal government has for 200 years since Congress first proposed an unconstitutional transportation department, felt unlimited in its power and jurisdiction, aided and abetted by a complicit judiciary that finds the rights to privacy and dignity in our Constitution. No amendment could possibly overcome the congressional compulsion to act for the general welfare. Limit the terms of office. Mr. Chairman and committee, Senate Joint Resolution 5 this year, calling for a constitutional amendment to impose term limits, has already failed. I'm not going to repeat that testimony, but most of the employees of the federal government, and although that's all being worked on now, are the fourth branch of government. What amendment can possibly come out of a convention to address the fourth branch of government, which is our problem? So, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions you might have, but please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thank you. We will, next one. Is Eldon online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll bring Eldon Stahl into the room.
All right, we have about 3 minutes left for testimony in opposition.
Okay. You hear me?
We can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Eldon Stahl from Evanston, Wyoming, and I'm opposed to SJ1. This is yet another example of the masterful marketing of such resolutions. Same hook, different bait. This time we have the terribly, terribly dangerous hook, as U.S. Representative Harriet Hagman put it, of opening up the U.S. Constitution for surgery. But that hook is adorned with the Convention of States Project's proprietary blend of 3 tantalizing, ultra-conservative sounding, red meat subjects as bait. The marketers are quite adept at distracting you from the issue at hand, which is changing the U.S. Constitution. Why? Because when we asked them how and where the Founding Fathers messed up when they wrote the Constitution, and which parts specifically of that document gave us the problems our country faces, they must admit that with very few exceptions, the Constitution is just fine, and that undermines their case. For example, let's say we simply ask how a federal government, which doesn't do well at all following the Constitution now, is going to follow a Constitution that has been changed. Well, first, some of the proponents from this group will claim that they're not trying to change the Constitution at all. Now, they're just trying to amend it. But I'm sure you as lawmakers who deal with amendments every day, you can see through this, I hope. Have you ever seen an amendment that changes absolutely nothing? That's just ridiculous. And frankly, Mr. Chairman, if proponents really don't know what amendments are, why should we treat seriously their resolution petitioning Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution? Now, if that doesn't work, they'll use what I call the Jedi mind trick, for lack of a better term, but they'll say something like, oh, the federal government actually does follow the Constitution quite well, but it's not the pocket Constitution. It's this 3,000-page book called the Constitution Annotated. Well, that's a classic red herring argument.
One that on the surface appears relevant, but upon further inspection is not. Now, while distracting from the question at hand of changing the US Constitution. Now, yes, the feds do give too much heed to this 3,000-page volume. But the solution to that problem, as presented in this resolution, is to change by amendment the pocket Constitution, not the 3,000-page book. So we're back to square one. We're shooting at the wrong target here. We still need to enforce and follow the pocket Constitution. This resolution is the wrong tool for the job, Mr. Chairman. So don't fall for this when they pull out that 3,000-page book. But in the end, if the argument for applying for a convention process for changing the US Constitution were so compelling, proponents would not have to resort to such rhetorical gymnastics. So please remember.
A few moments to wrap up. I'd appreciate it. We're out of time.
Yeah, if you take the bait, you get the hook. So please vote no on SJ1, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, we will move on to testimony in support of the bill. Ms. Phillips, could you bring on Senator Santorum? We will let him go first. And then just a reminder, we have 20 minutes for testimony in support of the bill. So please be respectful of each other's time and try to take 2 to 3 minutes per speaker.
Mr. Chairman, at this moment, I do not see Senator Santorum logged into Zoom.
All right, well, we will go to the room, and if he comes back on, we'll go back there. All right, please fill the chairs. Ms. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Julie Baker. I'm the State Director for Convention of States Action, and I live just outside of Hewlett. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on this very, very important process. I'd like to give some perspective on how much support there is in Wyoming for this resolution and ask you on behalf of these supporters to please vote yes on SJ1. But before I do, I thought it might be a timely time to address an important point that seems to get overlooked in this argument, if you like. The Constitution, as you know, was ratified with 7 articles. That's it. There were no Bill of Rights, no amendments to it. Article 5 was one of the 7 articles. It was pretty important to those folks who wrote it and unanimously voted to include the second part of Article 5. They intended that we use it. You will have been getting emails or phone calls asking for your support of Convention of States in general and SJ1 in particular. Some of you for years, and some of you only recently as freshmen. Constituents initially demonstrate their support for Convention of States by signing our petition. Because you normally only get supportive emails from your district, you might not realize that there are thousands of supporters of Convention of States across Wyoming, over 13,000. Wyoming has the second largest number of supporters in the country per capita, yet 19 other states have responded ahead of us. These constituents took the time to let you know that they're frustrated with Washington, D.C., squandering our resources and our money and dictating what we can and can't buy. It was inevitable that this was going to happen. It was expected. And that's why the state-initiated amendment proposal process was included in the Constitution in Article 5. Convention of States volunteers routinely engage with people and discuss with them how Article 5 can propose solutions to the problems that plague Washington, D.C. The overwhelming reaction is relief that there's a solution, and the framers gave us this most powerful, peaceful, legal, constitutional method to address judicial erosion of the Constitution, that the states can effectively push back in a meaningful and enduring way. The realization is followed by a stunned disbelief that Wyoming didn't lead the charge in this. All we're asking for is a meeting where those who attend, state legislators, debate topics and suggest solutions in the form of amendments. The amendments you suggest can be accepted or rejected by you, The state legislators control the entire process. Support is only growing for this. This is Wyoming's opportunity to put our stake in the ground. Finally join Florida and Texas and Wisconsin, Utah, Nebraska, and 14 other states to bring enduring structural reform. Please take into consideration the supporters in this room, those on Zoom, hundreds in your own districts, and the thousands across Wyoming, and vote yes on SJ1. And I'll take any questions and do my best if you have any.
Are there any questions? All right, I think we'll go back online. He has joined us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, he is joining the room now.
Got it.
Good afternoon.
I'm here at the state capitol, but not in Cheyenne. I'm in Des Moines. So I've got my Iowa flag in the background just to validate that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify here. And the best thing for me to do after going after the opposition is just to walk through very quickly some of the comments that were made with respect to this very important resolution. I'm here in Des Moines. I've been to Cheyenne many times because I know that the answer to the problems facing Washington are not found in Washington. And the founders put you folks at the top of the food chain in this Constitution. And for a long time, you actually ruled Washington, D.C. After the 17th Amendment, when you gave up the right to appoint United States senators, that changed. People say, don't mess with the Constitution, that this thing is perfect. Well, it's been changed, not just changed by constitutional amendment, but it's been changed by court decisions. Yes, that 2,600-page document is the Constitution we live by. And the way you change that 2,600-page document is to change the underlying amendments to underlying text of the Constitution. You can't change it other than through court decisions otherwise. And so it's important to understand that you have the power to actually shape the future of the country. And in fact, the founders wanted you to do it. They gave you this power, and they were not the least bit concerned about a runaway convention. Why? Because conventions that require 3/4 of the states to ratify anything that comes from the convention is inherently is the hardest thing to do in this country. There's no governing body that has a 3/4 majority necessary. I even challenge Wyoming, which has a super duper majority of one party. How many bills would pass in the Wyoming legislature that 3/4 of the members had to vote in favor of it? The reality is it's hard because it should be hard. What's not hard is for, unfortunately, the left in America to change the Constitution by constitutional amendment through Supreme Court edict. That's what's been happening. The left has no desire to have a convention of states. They don't get their amendments in the Constitution from the bottom up. They do it from the top down. They're not going to take over anything. They don't want to take over, and they don't need to take over anything. A runaway convention is simply a myth. And they also say that, well, Congress doesn't pay attention to the Constitution as it's drafted. The reality is, if you look at the amendments, there have been 17 since the founding. Every single one of them is adhered to. There's only 2 terms for a president. Senators are not appointed by the legislature anymore. There's an income tax in this country. You go on down the list, they're all adhered to, and frankly, they're all adhered to faithfully. The reality is that if you need, as you do, to pass a constitutional amendment, if you have 34 states gather to call for a convention, 50 states gather, 26 of them propose amendment, and then 3/4 adopt it, you've got a consensus in America. And no court, no Congress is going to buck that consensus, and they never have in the history of our country when it came to a constitutional amendment. The idea that this is something that's dangerous is a creation of the left that unfortunately some of our side have decided to adopt. It's not real. The reality is that this is something that is necessary. I always use the illusion that the country is on fire. If anybody doesn't believe that we're facing a fiscal crisis with almost $37 trillion in debt, when I left Congress, it was 6, and now it's 37. If you don't, please raise your hand if you don't think we're headed to a fiscal collapse. Raise your hand if you don't think that there's a tyranny occurring in Washington and grabbing power away from the people in the states. In a simple word, the house is on fire, and you folks are standing across the street looking at a house on fire, and you're worried that a car may come across and hit you on the way to put the fire out. Don't worry about a car that may or may not come across the street when you know for sure that the problem is real and this country needs your help. So I encourage you to pass the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Santorum for being here today. In your opinion, so Wyoming is a special state. It is the least populated state, and in this system, a proposed system for a convention of states, would you agree that this elevates Wyoming's voice in a disproportionate way to other states?
No question about it. It's the only forum that you will have where all decisions are being made. You have a Senate, obviously, which Wyoming has, quote, disproportionate representation, but anything that comes through the Senate has to pass the House, which has proportional representation. This convention of states is simply one state, one vote at every step in the process. The 34 states that are to call the convention, each state gets one vote on doing that. At the convention, 26 states, each state gets one vote. And at confirming and ratifying 38 states, each state gets one vote. There is no better forum for the state of Wyoming to see its issues being raised than in this forum. And people say, well, we don't know that it'll be one state, one vote. And the answer to that is, yes, we do. And the reality is that prior to 1776, all the states' meetings were held by a convention of states because we didn't have a central government. So there were literally dozens of conventions of states. And by the way, every single one of them was one state, one vote. The convention called in Annapolis in 1786, one state, one vote. The one that was at Annapolis called for a broader convention that was held in Philadelphia in 1787, one state, one vote. Since the Constitutional Convention in 1787, there have been almost 20 regional conventions of states called by the different states. The Colorado River Compact was decided by a convention of states. California got one vote, Colorado got one vote, Utah got one vote, etc. They've always been. And so you say, well, what does that mean? What it means is that I'm in Iowa. Iowa, when they convene, they have no rules. Well, how do they know what to do? Precedent. Precedent is how it's governed. Almost every body in the country starts their session like Congress. They have to vote for a speaker first. Is there a rule that says it? No, but there's precedent that says it. And that's how you start. Now, will California and New York try to change it to make it a proportional representation? I mean, proportional voting? Of course they could try, but there's 3 times more small states than there's big states. By the way, they tried at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. They were voted down, and they'd be voted down again. And that's why Wyoming is king at this convention.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the testimony.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman, committee members. My name is Jordan Tilley. I live in Glen Rock, Wyoming. I've grown up in Wyoming my whole life, born and raised. And I became passionate about convention of states a few years ago. I testified here when we were all under kind of COVID lockdown. And one thing that I think you guys probably know best is that fear tends to rise, especially during legislative session. We get it in the mail, we see it on ads, Facebook, and that's one thing that is really powerful. There's been great bills that you guys have put out, and I've seen a lot of fear that has come after those. And that's one thing that when you're talking with people about the Convention of States, people in opposition show a lot of fear, towards that. And there have been 11,000 proposals for amendments to the Constitution. We have 27. So that means it's 0.2% chance of a amendment or a proposal actually becoming ratified and going through the process. So I feel that the states should take their chance at having that proposal getting together and having a meeting. And I think a lot of fear comes from misunderstanding that there's no power in the convention itself. It's the states getting together and proposing ideas of how we could fix some of these problems. I actually went to Texas last fall and was part of a simulated convention of states. And so we had people from all over the country come. I do not remember exactly how many representative states there were. I want to say it was 40 plus of people coming from different states. And so we ran through a simulation of what a convention of states would look like. And one of my favorite parts was these are regular people, just as you guys are, as you head back home after legislative session is over. You don't stay here in Cheyenne. You go back to your farms, to your jobs, to your family. And that's what it would look like at a convention of states if it were to be called, where it is the state legislators going that are closer to the people, that really know how some of these federal bureaucracies overreach and overstep and really cause harm to the states. In Washington, they might not see that because they live there year round. They might not ever come back, as we've seen with some of our representatives that didn't even live here. And that's who's representing us in Washington. So they don't see the effects of some of these things that we could fix with amendments to the Constitution. So that was one of my favorite parts. And I know that you guys still believe in the process and the system and the Constitution. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here serving us as you guys do. You're not getting rich doing it, you know. So I know you guys believe in the system. So I think we take our shot, join the call for convention, and get together and propose some ideas. Because there were really, that was my second favorite part, was some of the proposals that came up at the simulated conference or convention. Some ideas that you had, somebody might have a little different take on it. And it just kind of sparked activity of, well, this is what our state sees and this is how we've responded, and different ideas, just brainstorming. It was really neat to see. And I know that if we were to call a convention of states, that we would see that same type of brainstorming and collective success. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Dooley, and I took time off work to come down here from Casper. I represent myself. I agree with what Rick Santorum said, what's been said so far, and I see the biggest problem is people confuse a convention of states to propose amendments as to automatically changing the Constitution. It doesn't happen that way. You guys wouldn't put up with that if we got together, 800 of us, and said, we're going to take away the Second Amendment. Would you guys go with that? No. Neither will anybody else. It's to propose amendments. The states have the final say so, one way or another. You see all that about California and New York going to take over. You guys won't allow that. When you put them there as one state, one vote, that's what you're going to allow. I assume that's what you're going to allow. When it comes to the problems, they said, what amendment would do that? Well, one of the amendment is the Constitution now is litigated to this monstrosity as we talked about. They need to maybe, like say, talk about those. If you're going to litigate it, it's going to be approved. It needs to then be voted on by the states. I'm just spitballing here. I'm not a member of this, but there's many ways to cover all of those issues. The people that say there is no way aren't looking for a way. It's kind of like when Washington, D.C. said, I see no evidence of this. Well, that's because they're not looking. As soon as you start looking, you find ways. You get all of these people together, you come with ideas. People are smart. A lot of politicians in Washington think we're not. People are. And when you get them together, we come up with good ideas. And this whole thing here, it literally is just to get us together to propose amendments to help control the federal government. They go in there as middle-class people and come out multimillionaires. Pretty sure none of you will come out of the Wyoming legislature multimillionaires. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. There's just all sorts of things that are problems in Washington that need to be looked at and fixed by the states, because Washington isn't going to cut off its own gravy train. And that's what I have. I ask you to vote yes this through, and I ask if there's any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Anyone else would like to testify? We have a few more minutes. Please fill the chairs. Three more minutes. Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this. These are important issues. These are issues that have been important for a long time. And I think it takes an important decision to work on these issues. And I think this is a mechanism that will work. I think we have the safeguards in there that it won't be a runaway. And we appreciate coming from Wyoming that it will be the one state, one vote. Trying to be brief, but lending my support to this. Would take any questions you or the committee may have.
Questions? Seeing none. Is there any further public testimony? Please come forward. If you'd like to testify to the chair, we have 2 minutes left, and we're doing testimony in support of the bill. Please go ahead. Just state your name and where you're from.
Okay. My name's John Ruth. I'm from Cheyenne, Wyoming, originally Littleton, Colorado. I'm a veteran, and I don't really get into politics much, but on behalf of we the people and humanity in general, the government is out of control. The power needs to be brought back to the people. The Constitution needs to be reread, not written. Annotations or whatever amendments that have been made for individual causes doesn't address our founding fathers' Constitution that addressed the whole, in my opinions. And I think that it's time that our government start doing what's best for all concerned. And not this government, but as you can see throughout the world, there's a big push from what do you call them, non-government organizations trying to overrun the world for a one world government. And we have a lot of our politicians in DC that support that. That needs to end. We were United States of America. We're not America of the world. We're to be governed by ourselves as a whole. And I'd just like to pass that on for whatever good it might do. And I hope that the Convention of States, I don't know everything about it, but it sounds to me like a good plan, a peaceful plan, as opposed to what it could be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, we'll now close public testimony, but I'll give Representative Brady a few minutes to say what you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here representing myself. I'm sure you've heard from me for several years in a row now, and I believe in the Constitution. I believe in we the people, and I look forward to some good debate on the floor, and would like to ask your support of Convention of States. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative Kelly, seconded by Representative Singh. Are there any amendments to the bill? I didn't think so. Is there any discussion on the bill? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, not going to take too long here, and I don't feel the need to explain many votes, but this is a big one and many people are paying attention. Personally, I am not convinced this is the way to go or should be done. That said, many states have spoken up. This is being argued in all corners of Wyoming. And only a handful of counties are represented here on the Education Committee. There are 9 members and 2 of us are from the same county. I think it would be responsible to act with some humility and send this to the full House so all corners of the state can have their say on this issue, and I will be voting yes.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was one of the first big bills that I got really involved with in the previous term in the 67th legislature, and it was an honor to carry this idea of a convention of states on the floor last time. I think that of the systems out there to talk about a proposed change to the Constitution, this is the one the one avenue in which Wyoming's voice is disproportionately strong. In a system where there is one state, one vote, Wyoming's vote is 67.6 times stronger than California's. This amendment process is slanted in favor of rural states specifically. And so I think there are comprehensive guidelines to how we get to the threshold of states that are required to have the conversation in the first place. But the system that's being proposed, it does fight for Wyoming. In the smaller states do have a stronger voice, which is recognized. And I think that the implementation of the 17th Amendment took a lot of the voice of the legislature away from how we do things in government. That was a built-in check, a check and balance between the state governments and the federal government. And so I think this is, by passing this resolution, we go in the step of recognizing federalism as an essential component of our government. So I will be an aye vote.
Further, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to everyone that's here today, and thank you to what we just heard. I would agree and add on that this is a big vote, and it certainly is a big vote for Wyoming in our standing in this nation and for all the reasons that we've heard already today. And I feel a responsibility to vote yes on this because it is very pressing, really, when you think about where we are as a nation and where we're headed as a nation. And I'm very thankful that it's constitutional. I'll be an aye vote.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, we are voting on Senate Joint Resolution 1. Please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, on Senate Joint Resolution 1, Convention of States do pass. Representative Bratton has left an absentee vote of no. Representative Erickson has left an absentee vote of aye. Representative Gudenmas has left an absentee vote of no. Representative Kelly.
Aye.
Representative Lawley has left an absentee vote of aye. Representative Singh.
Aye.
Representative Strock.
No.
Representative Williams.
Aye.
Chairman Andrew.
Aye.
6 aye, 3 no.
The bill is passed the committee. We are now adjourned. Thank you.
And folks, it's yet another victory. You have just been watching as the Wyoming House Committee on Education just voted 6-3 to pass our Article 5 application, SJ1, onto the full floor of the Wyoming House. So again, another amazing victory. We heard opposition testimony first, which we don't always get, but it's nice when they make the opponents go first. Then we heard from the proponents. State Director Julie Baker did an incredible job. We heard from Senator Rick Santorum, who made the case for COS and responded to the opponent testimony. We heard some great questions from Representative Singh, a supporter on the committee. We heard the Wyoming Farm Bureau come out in support of Convention of States. And then Representative, I think it was Marlene Brady, showed up at this committee hearing just to put her name in there as a supporter of Convention of States. And by the way, our sponsor, Senator Eric Barlow, did an incredible job making the case and introducing the resolution. So again, we have just passed the Wyoming House Education Committee by a vote of 6-3. I understand we have Regional Director Deanna Beckett standing by. Deanna, congratulations again.
Great to have another win. Just one more step in Wyoming. We're excited to get that next notch on the rung on the notch, something like that.
That's right. Well, to remind anyone who's just now tuning in, we have already passed Wyoming on the Senate side. This was the first step in the House. We had to get through this committee. We did that with flying colors. Again, a 6-3 vote. So next stop is the Wyoming, the full House will need to debate and vote on this. Deanna, how do you feel about this victory? What did you think about how the team did?
I thought they did great. Seeing the vote come out of, one vote extra, we were expecting a little different result. So it was exciting to see the extra vote. And just some of the highlights that I wrote down. I didn't write down, I didn't have my pen out when Barlow was speaking, but I love how he is such a champion for us. He was able to field those questions. He knows this in and out. He has been educated, I know, by all of our headliners and you. We've met with him personally, and I just love that Senator Barlow just knows his stuff. But Julie, our state director, I was just impressed with. I wrote a few things down from her testimony and how we have allowed judicial erosion, and all we're doing is asking for a meeting. That's all we're doing. It's not, I think there were a few, I can't remember what state we were talking to a few weeks back, and they thought that when we called the meeting, we made amendments and they became law right then and there. This is just a meeting to discuss them. And I loved how she enunciated that. And then, of course, she not encouraged, but she reminded her state legislators that they have control of this entire process, and they do. So it's exciting to see the great testimony, very simple, very basic, and then our supporters, of course, on the committee. Representative Singh and Representative Williams. Big vote for Wyoming and our standing in our nation. And Representative Singh mentioned how this is slanted in favor of rural states. I love how they put that it does. A convention fights for Wyoming. It fights for our small rural states. And I'm just excited to see where we go next and get into the House.
Yeah, absolutely. Deanna, I want to comment on one thing you said, because I actually brought this up before the committee hearing while we were waiting for it to start, and it did actually come up in the hearing today. And that is this idea that the opponents want to plant that a convention is about going in, opening up the whole Constitution and making changes to the text that's in the Constitution. They act like it's something very different from what Congress does when it proposes amendments that get sent out amendment by amendment for ratification to the states. But it's not. The convention does the same thing that Congress does when Congress proposes amendments. It drafts the text of individual amendments, and each one gets sent out to the states, and it takes 38 states to ratify. And then if they get ratified, they get added to the end like the other amendments. So I want to make that clear, because it seems like our opponents just don't get it. They think that they either think or they want others to believe that the process is something very different and very scary and drastic and unlike anything, that has been done before by way of proposing amendments. So just wanted to point that out. Sorry, my dogs are also excited about this victory. So Deanna, if viewers are watching from Wyoming, what can they do?
Well, we're off to the House, so you need to contact all of your House representatives. If you are a petition signer, you will be getting a message really soon, maybe tonight, early tomorrow. And we want you to contact your House representative. Let them know that you want a yes vote on SJ1 in Wyoming. And if you're not in Wyoming, call your representative, call your senator, get involved. You can get involved at conventionofstates.com/act and start volunteering. We need more people to be a loud voice for Convention of States.
That's right. Well, as we sign off, I just want to recap again. We have just passed the Wyoming House Committee on Education by a vote of 6-3. Next stop and final stop for Wyoming to become state number 20 to pass our Article 5 application is the full House floor debate and vote. So stay tuned for news on when that might happen, and stay tuned for news about our live stream coverage on Wednesday. Again, we've got a bunch of committee hearings, so we'll be seeing you again on Wednesday. Thanks everyone for watching, and congratulations to Wyoming.